Welcome to Democracy Does, the Civic Power Playbook, a podcast that cuts through the noise to explain what's really happening in our democracy. Each episode breaks down key issues with insight from policy experts and change makers, giving you clear tips to take action. Whether you're fired up or feeling stuck, you're in the right place to get informed and get inspired, because democracy works best when we all... Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Democracy Does, the Civic Power Playbook. Talk about a serious treat that we have today. Being a host, I get to interview another host. That's really cool because the host of this show, Corey Nathan, host of Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other, is able to have tough conversations, honest conversations. He knows his stuff. He has a personal journey that gives him a lot of gravitas in order to wade into these tough waters. He's a self-proclaimed serial entrepreneur. He has had multiple businesses that have been very successful, and he is a civic storyteller. He says he has made it his mission to help promote goodwill so people can stop the extreme rhetoric and civic paralysis and really engage in ways that are healthy, productive, and ultimately unifying. Thank you so much, Corey, for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Robin. It's really great to be with you.
Yeah, I thank you. I appreciate that. And I was really happy when we were able to correspond because your podcast is so powerful. And before I even get to my first question, I want you to give us a snapshot of what is your podcast about talking politics and religion without killing each other. It sounds self-explanatory, but tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, the name's a little long and a little clunky, but I've been exhorted to keep it because it says exactly what we're all about. I think it's more a mission than a podcast, because years ago, part of my spiritual journey, my political journey, I found myself in crowds where I wasn't as concerned about individual issues so much as our ability to see each other and communicate with each other across differences. And this is going back now 20 years ago almost, where we would hear one thing maybe about the way somebody might have voted, even on suspicion. Oh, I suspect you might be voting for one of them. Now I know everything I need to know about you. And there were these tensions that started to flare up. And it seemed to me that if we couldn't figure that out and really see each other and be able to communicate with each other, then the issues almost didn't matter. Tax policy, foreign policy, those things almost didn't matter if we couldn't have real, healthy civic conversations. By the way, I love the way you put it. I'm going to steal shamelessly civic storyteller. I'm going to steal that, maybe make some bumper stickers.
Thank you. I'm flattered. I appreciate that. Well, I want to ask you, I've got to ask you about the seeing each other, being seen. You had a really powerful short podcast a couple weeks ago about the power of seeing someone and what that means in terms of seeing their humanity, who they are. And you had, I believe you had promoted that or aired that episode shortly after Jesse Jackson had passed away. And I ask you about it because so often the people who are considered invisible are the ones that are impacted the worst by policies. The powerful are the ones that get seen and heard. Yeah. And I wanted to ask you about the importance of the being seen. Tell me about that. Why did you think it was important to discuss that?
Yeah, that poem, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. It's I am somebody. That's so powerful. Gosh, it does seem to me that over the last several years, there are folks whose behavior is purely driven by grievance, and that grievance is not being seen. So sometimes I'll sit down with somebody and I have my own points of view on different issues or how folks voted in the last election. But more than anything, I want somebody to know that I see their humanity, that they're not defined by one vote. As much as I might passionately disagree with that particular vote, that they're still a human being, and maybe there's some reasons that I don't get. And I found that if in these conversations, in these tough conversations, if I do nothing else than to see that person as a human being that's defined by more than just that one vote or whatever color hat they might wear, then we're doing some work.
Mm-hmm. How did you even get on this journey of being a podcast host? How did you evolve to where you are now, and even to have this be your mission?
Oh man. So so the podcast journey started with the very first podcast I ever listened to. I have a little bit of a background, quite a bit of a background in
Mhm.
producing.
Uh-huh.
I produced theater in New York when I was a young man, and then moved out to Los Angeles and started producing some independent film. And I then got involved on the executive side of the entertainment industry. But that, I don't know, there's a void in one's soul when you get away from creative endeavors. And when I
Yes.
heard my very first podcast, it just struck a chord in me, and I fell in love with the medium. And before I even got to the end of that first episode that I listened to, it was a Mark Maron episode, a long
Hmm.
form
Oh
interview,
yeah.
candid, intimate conversation among interesting people on interesting things. And as a listener, I felt like I was in the room with those speakers. I felt like I was at
Yes.
that table with them. And I started imagining conversations and stories that we could tell uniquely well in podcasting. And I produced a couple other podcasts first, but there was something in the front of my mind that I was working towards. It was
Hmm.
almost like I was getting my reps in because there was something really important and pressing that I wanted to use this medium for.
Yes.
And that is talking politics and religion without killing each other. Because
Yes.
it was something I was so keenly aware of for the better part of 15, 20 years, as I already mentioned. And in the fall of 2020, we started doing this thing.
Hmm. Congratulations. What's unique too about your journey, when I was doing some research about you, you had a very personal journey in terms of converting
Yeah,
from Judaism to becoming a born again Christian.
yeah,
And that itself is a very tough conversation I'm sure you had to have with family. But in many ways, it probably prepared you for some of the fires you've stepped into in this new realm. So talk about the evolution of who you were then, how you
sure.
made that, and how that's informed you today.
You know, you just made me think of imagine if my father ever wrote a memoir about this journey that we've gone down together. I think the memoir would simply be titled Oi. So 20 something years ago, I went home and I had become a Christian, and we were going home for Thanksgiving, and we took a red eye, got there Thanksgiving morning, took my father out on the porch of the house where I grew up. They were still living there, and we had this 2 hour long conversation. And at the time, he took it in a very cold and analytical way.
Mhm.
But about a month later, he sent me what I learned in that month. My mother told me that he wanted us to do what's called sitting shiva.
Mhm.
And that's the ritual Jewish observant. We went to an Orthodox synagogue, so that's the ritual observant Jews go through when an immediate family member dies. Um, and that's what it is when you feel that you've lost your child. In his case, he felt he lost his child to Christianity. He was going to sit Shiva. He didn't ultimately do that because the guilt of a Jewish mother outweighs the conviction of a Jewish father. But he did send me a 10-page single-spaced letter outlining all of the reasons that I must not become a Christian. And it
Wow.
was an emotional, from an emotional perspective, a filial obligation perspective,
Mhm.
political, historical, all kinds of
Yeah.
perspectives. And it was the beginning of a conversation that, thank God, he's still with us, and
Mhm.
we're still having that conversation.
Yes, that's beautiful, and you're still close.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we've had our ups and downs as any family
Who
will.
hasn't with their parents?
Yeah, yeah. But that conversation evolved. Those first 3 years in particular were very fraught, very tense.
Yes. Yeah.
But you know, we learned from each other. Uh,
Mhm.
you know, and I learned. I began a journey of learning about my own family's history. Our
Mhm.
history. His side of the family came from Ukraine, and
Oh, wow.
a lot of our family members who didn't make it out in the 19 teens and early 20s. were eviscerated either, in the Bolshevik Revolution or eventually in World War II. My mother's side of the family, those who didn't leave prior to World War II were we lost in the Holocaust.
Oh,
Just so there's a lot there, and it
yes.
carries a lot of weight. And I came to understand, for example, that you know, uh, when we see a cross, my grandmother, when I became a Christian, was still alive. And when she sees a cross, she can't not see the crosses that the men who stormed
Yeah.
through their shtetl in what's now Chernihiv, Ukraine, were wearing on their chests before they burned their houses down and raped our grandmothers and our great grandmothers. So there's a lot of weight in some of those symbols, and it's unfortunate, but that's part of the weeds that we have to go through in order to see each other. Kind of the point that you were bringing up before. We have to kind of clear out this brush before we're able to see each other and talk to each other.
I am very moved by that because so often religion is weaponized, clearly. And when you talk about seeing the crosses, think about the KKK and then burning
Burning
crosses and
crosses.
and how that is used. And I mention that because some of the other episodes I have heard you talk about, you have been very successful and creative in diffusing some of the weaponization of the Bible that the hard right has been using to really justify some behavior that seems very much at odds with um, Christianity.
Yeah,
And so I want to just do a quick round. I want to ask you a couple of
sure.
questions.
Yeah.
So, what do you say when someone who is a born again Christian who quotes the Bible, cherry picks, and says, well, we need to have secure borders and the white nation is the right nation. I mean, how do you manage those conversations?
I got 3 words. Let's keep reading. Let's keep reading, because you talk about Matthew 10. Let's read Matthew 10, but we're not going to take this like a piece of glass and throw it on the ground and pick up shards so that we can stab people with little shards, a half a verse here and a half a verse there.
Hmm.
No, we're going to read it. You say you take the Bible. I'm not talking to you, obviously. I'm
Yes.
talking to this Christian right nationalist. I've been in these conversations and I got my butt kicked, in various Bible studies. I've gotten kicked out of Bible studies. Why? Because I had the temerity to say, let's keep reading. Somebody dared to take the top of Leviticus 19 and say, well, this is why we have closed borders. I said, brother, let's keep reading, because you get to the end of that chapter and it is the opposite of a closed border thing. We're welcoming the stranger because God loved you when you were a stranger in a strange. You're getting me. Sorry. Now I'm preaching it, but
Yeah,
don't light that
well,
fire, because we can go. Let's keep reading. That's what I'm going to say.
I asked because there are people who will cherry pick certain things. And again, my goal is not to be partisan, but it is to allow us to have a conversation so that we can bridge gaps.
Well, if I may
Yeah.
interrupt just for a second, I don't see myself as partisan,
Yeah.
because first of all, because there's any given time where folks aren't. It's not a prejudice against me. It's just that everybody hates me, because I'll get my butt kicked from all sides, But when I do, if there's any time that I'll look partisan, it's because I feel like somebody's hijacked something really important. Somebody's
Yes.
hijacked the word patriot. Somebody's
I
hijacked the
understand.
word Christianity, and
Yes.
I want to steal it back. That's
Yes.
when I'll sound partisan. No, you're not going to steal a beautiful word like evangelical
That's right.
and call it your own for something that is just so antithetical to the words of Jesus himself.
That's right.
You can preach directly from Jesus's words, and you're going to get kicked out of some churches now. What is that liberal stuff? Well, that liberal stuff happens to be the person that you claim is Lord. Let's talk
That's
about
right.
it, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So I get fired
absolutely.
up when we talk about this stuff.
Yeah,
Sorry,
no.
you're pressing my buttons now.
I love that. I know. And if we had more time, and maybe I'll have to have you on again, I could go through different parts, because I have been in rooms with people who have tried to justify that. And it's a very difficult thing, because the way that I was raised,
Yeah.
was very different. And I have these conversations with my parents. Shout out to my mom and dad who are definitely listening, who say, you know, you lead with kindness. You lead
Mm,
with the words of what is right,
yeah.
of what is correct, what is
There,
true.
there's a really good resource. Someone who's become a dear, dear friend of mine, a lady named Lisa Sharon Harper.
Hmm.
Lisa wrote her most recent book is called Fortune. That was a couple of years ago, but there's another one called The Very Good Gospel.
Okay.
And the very good refers to shalom and certain words right there starting in Genesis. But it's reclaiming a wholeness. Shalom
Yeah.
sometimes means peace, sometimes hello, sometimes goodbye, but there's a wholeness. And there's when in this, I know some folks, a lot of folks who listen to this aren't necessarily Christians or believers, or what have you,
Yeah.
but just in the story of the Bible, this creator character, this creator God looked at the God's creation and said, this is very good, and that those who are trying to reintroduce chaos and
Hmm.
division, that is the opposite of what the
Yes.
creator God called very good. So Lisa
Hmm.
Sharon Harper, The Very Good Gospel, I highly,
Yeah.
highly recommend.
Excellent. I appreciate you mentioning that. And just one more thing before we pivot. You had mentioned in another interview, in terms of, even if you are not someone, as you said, who is religious, you can use the Bible as a guide in
Yeah,
terms of,
it's ancient literature.
yeah,
So folks who are interested in literature and history and archaeology, sociology, it's a good source, and it's also a good source because it's been a reference around which a lot of other philosophies have been built.
that's
So
right.
yeah, it's good to have at least some familiar. And I'm not saying this from my kind of salesy evangelical standpoint, just
No,
from like a Western civilization standpoint.
exactly, exactly. And I appreciate you saying that. I want to know, what has been the most powerful or surprising episode you have done?
Oh boy. So the first thing that comes to mind is there's a fella whose work I've been reading for years and years, a fella named David Brooks.
Hmm.
He'd been with the New York Times for 20 plus years and
Oh,
just moved
yes.
over to the Atlantic and is teaching a special course at Yale now. His last two books actually were very, very formative for me. The second to last one that I think came out in 2018 or 2019 is called The Second Mountain. And it had a
Okay.
lot to do with me pivoting from my business endeavors to what I'm doing now. This is a business endeavor for me, but
Yes.
it's an avocation that is married with my vocation now, which I hadn't
Yes.
had prior.
Hmm.
But the last book, and it resonates with what you just asked me about. It's called How to Know a Person, and it's almost a user's guide. He actually builds on a lot of what Monica Guzman wrote in her book a year prior called I Never Thought of It That Way.
Hmm.
Um, David's they can both be textbooks if we were going to develop a seminar on this.
Hmm.
Um, but it is about some of the internal work that's required to be able to have these hard conversations in a more civically healthy way.
Hmm.
But in that conversation with David, there's one chapter in that book about his friend Pete that he grew up with. And Pete struggled with mental illness his whole life. And I subsequently was diagnosed as bipolar, a certain form of bipolarity or manic depression. And I was going through a season at that time that ultimately led to that diagnosis. But in my notes, when I was prepping to have this conversation, I had a big note that said, thank David for the chapter on Pete. And then big stars, asterisk bold, don't talk about it, because I knew I couldn't talk about it at that time. So David, being the perceptive, sensitive, empathetic person that he is, I got to that part. I said, David, I really wanted to thank you for that chapter on Pete. And then I was about to get into my next question. He said, wait, Corey, that looks like that really affected you. Tell me about that. And Robin, I burst into tears. I couldn't contain myself for about
Wow.
10 minutes. So that was one of the most surprising
Wow.
things that have happened in the course of these conversations. To his credit,
That's
David was
beautiful.
really, really gracious, and
Uh-huh.
he didn't make me feel embarrassed, as
Yeah.
embarrassed as I was. And he said, after we stopped recording, he said, I got to do lots of these every time a book comes out, but this is one of the most memorable ones.
Oh, I'm sure,
So,
you know what? I'm sure he was really touched as someone who put your work out there, and to know that it resonated with someone in that way. I think that's a beautiful thing. I
yeah,
really, really do.
yeah.
Um, well, I do want to end our podcast. I try to end them on a really positive note, because I want to give people something in which they can be empowered and feel hopeful, because this is a very divisive time. It's a scary time. And you are a master communicator. You've walked the walk. Not only do you talk the talk, you walk the walk. And I would love to know, what are 3 power play tips that you would give to our listeners in terms of, how do you have those tough conversations? How do you have a tough conversation with someone who is just on the complete other side of what your perspective may be?
That's a great question. And it really forces me to distill down some really practical ways. Sometimes we just need a compass when we're entering
Yes.
into these things.
Yeah.
So the first that I will say is curiosity over contentiousness.
Mhm.
Curiosity over contentiousness. So what does that look like? Uh, when I am headed to the pub and I know I'm going to meet one of the fellows who wears that, red hat. Um, and by the way, I happen to be a conservative, like an Alex P. Keaton conservative, I kind of jokingly say, but this is a different, flavor, if you will. But
Yes.
I know that I'm entering into a conversation with somebody that sees me a certain way. And so my my habit for many years was to rehearse certain comebacks, anticipate what they were going to say and what I
Mhm.
was going to say back. And, on the ride over there, I'd be rehearsing those, right? Now
Right.
I'm doing a different sort of rehearsal, a different sort of preparation. And that preparation is keeping Manny Guzman's book in mind. I am preparing my heart, preparing my mind, preparing myself to have that disposition that allows for the possibility that I'll arrive at that point of saying, I never thought of it that way.
Yes.
And that disposition allows me to do what we're talking about, to see that person as a human being, to ask those questions. Oh, that's interesting. How did you arrive at that conclusion? To
Yes.
ask that person about themselves and open them up to their story so I can see their humanity. So curiosity over contentiousness. And it's really interesting. It's kind of like the Jedi mind trick of these conversations, is that if I am more open to their humanity, it sort of tricks them. Not that I mean to trick them, but it sort of tricks them into seeing my humanity.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, it's about feeling seen. It's
Right.
about feeling seen. And also not going into a conversation with the attitude of your fist up, but also
Yes.
being
Yeah.
open. So
Sorry, I feel
please.
like I'm
Yeah.
filibustering and we're going to break
No,
time here. But to the
no,
two other
please continue.
things um, is one is it's not on you.
Hmm.
So when I do enter into these conversations, a lot of times all I'm doing is I'm looking for, bam, book another meeting. I just want to have another conversation and keep the conversation going,
Yes.
because I want to nurture relationships. Now, a lot of times we want to drop the perfect, the perfect meme, the perfect
Yeah.
response, the perfect comeback, so we can convince this person and anybody else who might be listening to do a 180 and to vote for somebody from the different party the next time, or whatever it is that we're trying to convince them of. That ain't going to happen. What might happen, though, is instead of 180 degrees, you might have 1 degree of persuasion, right?
Yeah.
Um, but like I said, I am at my most persuasive when I am at my most persuadable. Now, don't get me wrong. I ain't voting for, Orange Man anytime soon. But, but there are some things I can be persuaded about. Like, oh, I understand now. So you were a lot more concerned about grocery prices, and you really thought
Yes.
that vote might have been
Yes.
the way that you could move closer to a more affordable grocery bill. I get it,
Hmm. Hmm.
So, but again, that the second point would be, it ain't all on you, and you're not going to convince somebody to do an 180-degree turn, but you
Yeah.
might be able to have 1 degree of persuasion, and then
Yes.
just keep coming back for more and nurture that relationship. The
Yeah.
last thing I'll say is, I mentioned before that I learned a lot about my mental disposition over these last few years. And part of that is understanding what my boundaries are, you
Mm,
know, and sometimes I, I am not the one. I am not the one to be in this conversation with this individual. So
yes.
it's not to say I'm not going to love them, but sometimes I need to love them from a safe distance. I need to love them from far away.
Uh-huh.
So knowing one's boundaries is also important, and everybody's boundaries is different. So I'm not going to judge somebody for saying, I just can't be in the room with any of those red hats. I'm not going to judge. I want to be there because I want to be in the game. I want to, if there's any one of them that might be persuaded to even just maybe not cast a different vote, but maybe just leave it blank. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to believe that I can have some influence in that conversation, or just in helping somebody see that, not everybody who happened to vote for Kamala is evil and a democrat, as you might call it. But I want to be in that game. But there is a point where I got to say, you know what? This is tripping me up. So sometimes I just got to walk away and love them from far away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I appreciate you saying that, because one of the things someone had said to me about my podcast is that, well, it's a little Pollyanna, and it's a little, I'm not trying to be Pollyanna. I am trying to make this approachable to everything, to many people. But
Yeah.
one thing, and I along those lines, is I have said, and I mean it, I will not have a conversation with someone who sees me as less than, who does not value my humanity. When people say, "Well, prove to me that you're X, Y, and Z," no, because that whole premise means that
Yeah.
you think that I need to prove something to you. No,
Right.
we're coming from the same playing field. So I appreciate you saying that, because there has been a lot of contentiousness, and we have had to often, as African Americans, we're often told that we have to be the bigger person, and sometimes that's not the easiest thing to do. And there's some things where we do have to set boundaries. So I do appreciate you saying that.
I
Um,
appreciate you, Robin. Your
yeah.
work is just really, you're in the thick of it. I feel like we're shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm.
Yes. Thank you.
So just a quick story before we wrap up.
Yeah.
My friend Lisa Sharon Harper, she has this great program called Freedom Road,
Yeah.
and the way she describes it is the march from Selma to Montgomery is still happening. We're on
Mhm.
it, and these are the conversations we're having. So
Thank you so well. It is nice to know that we are shoulder to shoulder, because it feels like it's a long road.
it is, baby.
But
It
yeah,
is.
it is, but it's made a lot easier knowing that people like you are out there. Thank you so much, Corey Nathan, host of Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other. You can find it on Apple and Spotify. Anywhere else we should look for you.
Yeah, YouTube. I'm loving Substack. We've been writing as an extension of the whole program. You can find me at Corey S. Nathan, at Corey, as is a Sam, Nathan. And politicsandreligion.us is the call sign for the show. But I really appreciate this conversation more than anything, and I hope it's not the last time. I hope we get to hang out.
I do too. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for all the work that you do.
You bet.
And now it's time to recap Corey's top 3 power plays. First, he says, lead with curiosity, not combativeness. Approach a difficult conversation as openly as you can. For those tough conversations, aim for 1 degree of understanding. It doesn't have to be a total conversion. And he says, if it's really too challenging, know your boundaries and just stick with them. And finally, if you want to check out Corey's podcast, Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other, you can find him on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And if you want to check out some deeper commentary, go to his Substack at Corey, Corey Nathan, Nathan. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you're feeling a little more hopeful, a little less stuck, and maybe even inspired to take action, because democracy does work when we all participate. And don't forget, sign up for our newsletter to get updates on when our next episode drops. You can go to my website, democracydoes.com. And as a bonus, if you haven't gotten one, a free and easy tip sheet on how to get involved.